Good morning. Welcome and thank you for being here. My name is Janet Tran, for those of you who I've not yet had the privilege of meeting, and I have the pleasure of serving as the director for the Center for Civics, Education, and Opportunity here at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute. At our Center for Civics, Education, and Opportunity, we work at the nexus of education policy and civic engagement, answering President Reagan's call for an informed patriotism to ensure a more prosperous future for America. And today, the CCEO, as we like to call our center, is proud to host Reducing Recidivism Through Post-Secondary Opportunities, as opportunities should be available to not just the select few, but to all Americans. I like to think about the inscription that is written on President Reagan's gravesite back at the Reagan Library, our library in California. And I'll paraphrase it, but it says, "I know in my heart that man is good, that there's a purpose and worth to each and every life, and that good will eventually triumph." And that actually is a paraphrase of itself of Anne Frank's words in some of the final pages of her diary. And it's those words that really have been a driving force for us, especially motivating when a young man asked if our program, Leadership in the American Presidency, accepted former felons. And that's a question we asked ourselves because we do believe that life has purpose and worth. And we are so privileged to recognize the work of Tyler Howe, who has not only served as a Leadership in the American Presidency student and helped 53 other Americans from all over the country understand the challenges of incarceration and the difficult trajectory in which it takes, the resilience it takes to recover, really changing the hearts and minds of Americans. And they were able to take that back to their institution. And not only that, he returned to us to serve as an intern to help shape this conversation today. So I did want to express my gratitude for your work, Tyler. I also want to acknowledge the relentless dedication of Michelle Faggart, who really has engineered today's event. Thinking about our work at the nexus of education policy and civic engagement, education is transformative, and it doesn't matter whether you fall in love with it when you are a mere child, a baby, and interested in the world, or if you discover your love for it 30 years after incarceration. And if that belief is part of our DNA, we know that we need to think about education as a tool for combating recidivism. Those in the room here today, those who've been working on this issue, understand that the numbers are in the 50 percentile. If you receive some form of post-secondary education, you're less likely to return to prison, to be behind prison bars, and you're more likely to be employed. So these aren't just issues of the heart of individuals succeeding, but this is issues of opportunities for America to succeed, unlocking potential of people who we used to write off. So we know that there's been a lot of progress, that increased access to Pell has put us on the right direction, but that doesn't equate for success or access for most incarcerated Americans. So we really need to think about how to be more pragmatic, how to be more effective as we think about this access. So today I'm so excited to bring two panels to the stage. One is Unlocking Potential, and that will provide overview, the legislation, the programs that have impacted our ability to provide post-secondary access to our incarcerated Americans. And of course, the general benefits in which we as a society receive if people who are incarcerated are educated. And then our second panel, the states in action, is a little more tactical because the realities, just because it's approved, are far more challenging. And the opportunities, once they are unlocked, provide incredible opportunities for states. And these pieces are incredibly challenging, but also incredibly rewarding. So with that, I am privileged to turn it over to our expert moderator, Dr. Noel Vest, to lead Unlocking Potential. Thank you, Noel.
What an honor it is to be here today. I first would like to say thank you to Michelle and Janet and Tyler for setting this up. This is just such an incredible opportunity. I'll go ahead and introduce myself a little bit to begin with. My name is Dr. Noel Vest. I am a research scientist in the Stanford University School of Medicine. Before that, I started my educational journey. I would say that I have the trifecta of experiences in this area. I started my educational journey at the College of Southern Nevada, which was a college and prison program that came into High Desert State Prison in Nevada way back in 2006 and 2007. I love having those 7 credits those 7 classes, all of the credits that I earned on my transcript. After I got out of prison, I have gone on, and the second part of my educational journey is both community college, undergraduate, university, and then a PhD program, graduate school at the Washington State University in Pullman, Washington. And then the trifecta part, the third part, was that I have gotten the opportunity while I was at Washington State University to go back inside of a prison, Coyote Ridge Prison in Washington, and actually teach a college and prison program course, which was, very, very enlightening and really a full circle moment for me. So having done the college and prison program, finished college after that program, and then the teaching is just, it really was an incredible experience. And it's really thanks to these college and prison programs for that. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started with the introductions of the rest of the panel. So let's go ahead and begin. Each of you comes to this panel with an amazing wealth of knowledge and experience. To get us started, please tell us a little bit about your background, what brings you to this work, and what you are working on currently. And we'll go ahead and start this one with Stan.
Right, so thank you. Is this, you can probably hear me pretty good, but hopefully you can hear me through the cameras. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. It's always a great pleasure to be amongst such esteemed professionals and experts. I have the opportunity, it seems like, more and more to sit on panels like this with amazing people such as today. But so I am Stan Andrees. I am a formerly incarcerated individual with 3 felony convictions. I was sentenced to 10 years in prison as a prior and persistent career criminal. In my early 20s, I was sitting in a courtroom where I had a prosecutor pushing actually for 20 years to life in prison because she felt that I had no hope for changing the decisions that I had been making up until that time in my early 20s. Fast forward some time, I'm now Dr. Stan Andrees, endocrine scientist and professor right down the street at Howard University College of Medicine. To some of us, we consider it the Mecca of HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. Prior to Howard, or almost simultaneous as well, I was a former faculty at Johns Hopkins Medicine, the #1 research institution by research dollars, at least in the country. And I'm also a visiting professor at Georgetown Medicine. And that wasn't quite enough for me. I was, just thinking like I should be doing more. So I took the hustle across seas, and I'm also a visiting professor at Imperial College London. So, needless to say, I didn't quite live up to the expectations of that prosecutor those many years ago, who felt that I was going to be in this revolving door of incarceration, which of course, today we'll talk a little bit about that revolving door of incarceration and the realities that are present for people that look like myself and come from places like Ferguson, Missouri, where I'm from. I got involved in making decisions that led to that path of going to prison pretty early, arrested for the first time at 14, and continued to make those poor decisions for that prosecutor to be pushing for such a lengthy sentence. But fortunate enough to have had some support systems that didn't lead to me being in that revolving door, and eventually led to me understanding how to navigate some of these barriers that are put in place for people like myself, and ended up starting a nonprofit organization in Baltimore that serves folks nationally called From Prison Cells to PhD. So we work with currently and formerly incarcerated people all across the country, but particularly very proud of the work that we do with incarcerated individuals in Maryland and right in Baltimore City at Metropolitan Transition Center, where we are helping folks pursue and obtain higher education. And our mission, in our mission statement, we, the phrase that we use is helping people excel beyond what society and life circumstances has set to be the norm. And what that really, reading in between the lines, there is a society and incarcerated people, and just there's a belief of what someone who's been to prison is capable of, should be doing, is, has the capacity to do. And we want to break that narrative. We want to help people excel beyond that. So we have folks in our program that are pursuing advanced degrees and STEM degrees. And I'm looking forward to having that conversation with you today. And I will end there and pass it to my good friend, Dr. Wheeler.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm Dr. Belinda Wheeler. I am a senior program associate at the Vera Institute of Justice. I work on their Unlocking Potential team. Just briefly, Vera Institute of Justice is a national nonprofit with over 60 years experience working on social justice issues around the country. As I mentioned, I'm on the Unlocking Potential team. So there's a group of us out of over 300 employees. There's a group of us working in the Unlocking Potential initiative led by Margaret DeZerega. And what we do in that area is we are the official recognized technical assistance provider to the over 200 colleges and correctional institutions throughout the country that work on Second Chance Pell. They're part of the Second Chance Pell initiative that started in 2015. So just last week, we brought on a third round of Second Chance Pell schools that the Department of Education had selected. So all of my colleagues and I are busy, working with all the colleges as we kind of get them onboarded for their successful work in the higher education and prison space. And then also just briefly for some context, myself, I've been with Vera for just over a year now, but prior to my tenure at Vera, I was actually a tenured English faculty member at Claflin University, what we would consider the Mecca in South Carolina of historically Black colleges and universities. And while I was there, Claflin University, under my leadership, was a recipient of a Second Chance Pell Grant, the second round of the Second Chance Pell Grants. And we started a program there, Pathways from Prison in South Carolina, where we started offering programs to people who are currently incarcerated. So I wanted you to kind of know that little bit of context so that you can kind of see I come from the college side of things too, and now I'm working on the national nonprofit side of things there. So I'll pass it over to my colleague, Sean.
Sure. And I will be quick. Because I know we have much more important things to talk about than me. I'm Sean Addy. I'm the Director of Correctional Education at the U.S. Department of Education. My portfolio is primarily adult, career, and technical education, but I also work with other offices at the department, excuse me, who work on initiatives such as Second Chance Pell, as well as the full reinstatement of Pell. I also work across the federal government on sort of various interagency initiatives, the Department of Justice, the Office of Health and Human Services, the Department of Labor. And really, we just sort of work holistically, primarily on correctional reentry education, reentry issues. There's a lot of overlap, obviously, between, people who are justice involved in terms of the needs they have. It's not just education, it's not just housing, it's not just employment, it's everything. And so we work holistically across the government. Before coming to the department, I worked at the Vera Institute of Justice on college and prison initiatives. I'm the only non-PhD on the stage, so I'm an attorney by training, and I'm just very happy to be here and glad to contribute.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we'll kick it off with, why is reinstating Pell to incarcerated scholars so important, and why should it be a priority? And we'll kick it off this time with Sean down on the end.
I think reinstating Pell is important because, there are numerous reasons. One is, people who are in prison are going to be coming home, and we want people coming home, prepared to fit into the communities. And that means education, that means training, that means employment. But I think also there are some people in prison who aren't coming home. And I think Pell is important for them as well. And I think just, we know education has a transformative effect on people's life trajectories. Everyone in this room is here because of the education they received. And people in prison, should have those same opportunities.
If I could just jump in too, I agree with everything that Sean has mentioned here too. As you have probably seen in your own experiences or with loved ones, education, as Sean has said, really has the power to transform people's lives. And it's not just the person themselves who are receiving that education, right? Their families, their loved ones, their communities, those kind of like ripple on of positive effects, for those communities is so important. So I know that Vera and the Rand Institution have also, provided data points that kind of show for that small investment with regards to taxpayers' funds being targeted towards educational programming, the savings for taxpayers are, I think it's quadruple fold, just from a financial standpoint there, but too, that lifting up of communities, families, and that is just so important.
Yeah, I think, what I could add to that is when we think about our communities and, wanting safer communities, why wouldn't we want to provide opportunities for education for individuals who have gone through prison? So when folks are coming home, an argument might be, why should we be providing education to this group of individuals? And, I would argue back that that's exactly why we should, the reasons why you think we shouldn't is exactly the reasons why we should, because I'm sure you want a safer community. And, the data shows educating individuals increases their opportunities for employment, increases their opportunities for, being civically engaged, increases the chances of them staying home and not going back to prison. So, it's creating safer communities. And then, of course, for the individual, it's not only, and I think we've touched on it briefly, it's not only transformational for the individual, it's transformational for that individual's entire family and generation of family members to come. Today I'm fortunate enough to be here with my son William, my 4-month-old son, and I have one of my amazing students helping me out from right down the road at Howard. And, when I think about me being in prison and not having been offered the opportunities that I did to change my life, I think about what my sons and daughters' lives would be like without having had that opportunity. So it's more than the individual, it's that individual's entire lineage and even the family members that come before. For many people, that engagement in higher education also encourages brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers to pursue higher education and change their trajectories.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that sometimes the community and family really are kind of the forgotten people in this. I know that my own mom is beside herself with what's kind of happened since I was released from prison. So I can definitely relate to that. So we'll start out with Belinda on this one. So what do you wish every American knew regarding about education for incarcerated scholars?
I'm going to actually refer back to one of the great points that Sean had mentioned here earlier. 95%, over 95% of people who are incarcerated are going to be returned back into the communities. And, that really is a great investment in, what can those kind of flow on effects, for the communities in so many ways. Like, I'm sitting next to two incredible people who are great examples of, of how this works, and how this is such a great opportunity. And I think, it was an easy sell thinking of what I did at Claflin University. Like the whole mission and vision of historically Black colleges, is to help lift up, individuals who historically had not had access to educational opportunities. The same with a lot of like technical colleges, trade colleges, and, and even Ivy League institutions and stuff like that too. So, providing, and I think it's been mentioned here in some of the documentation leading up to this event too, you know, education is a right, you know, it is a human right. And, you know, by being able to provide people with quality educational opportunities is really important. And I think that's one of the great things that, you know, we've been seeing at the Vera Institute of Justice. And by being an approved technical assistance provider to these colleges in this space is providing them with that technical support so that they too, as they're, for some of them coming into this space for the first time, or perhaps it's been a, you know, a gap of several decades since they have been in this space, really providing them with the assistance to make sure that they are providing these quality programs. And I think to get back to, you know, what Americans need to know, these are your communities, you know, and, you know, it's just a win-win. And I know we're going to touch on this later too, but for employers and that as well, that's a really huge need and win for the communities as well. But I'll touch on that with the businesses later, but that's been a really big part of it as well.
I think I would also add that, you know, education in prison is hard. It's very difficult, especially higher education in prison, with people who are juggling employment, people who have to, you know, who they can't go to the library, they don't have internet access. So I think it's, you know, it's higher education in prison is like higher education outside, only much harder and with much less technological access. And you don't have office hours in the same kind of vein. And it's, you're balancing so many more things if you're pursuing higher education in prison. So I think it's, you know, you see, you know, students who participate in higher education in prison, they do better in prison than they do on campus. You know, there's some of the best students. They're so extremely motivated because for so long people haven't believed in them. And then a professor comes in and that professor is an inspiration and it motivates. And, you know, I think people could learn a lot if they looked a little bit more inside of what's happening inside of prison, especially in the higher education in prison space. I know there's been a couple of documentaries, and I would also recommend people, you know, see about going inside a prison. A lot of people, you know, unless it's they've been themselves or they're visiting a family member, have never been inside a prison. And I think a lot can be learned by going in and seeing what the conditions and the situations are like.
So I would just quickly add, talent is distributed evenly. It's opportunity and access that is not distributed evenly. There are some exceptional individuals inside, you know, the walls of prison. You know, oftentimes when I share my story, I have individuals in the audience and folks feel as if I am this exception, that I have, you know, that I'm, you know, intelligent beyond what the other individuals that I sat in the cells with are. And that's just couldn't be farther from the truth. There's just some brilliant individuals behind the walls. They just haven't been given access and opportunity. So, you know, and that is evident in what was just mentioned. And, you know, I know from the work that we do with helping different college and prison programming, most faculty will tell you that the best classroom that they've ever had in their entire, like I'm talking 30, you know, professors who've been, you know, teaching 30 plus years, and they will tell you that the greatest class and the greatest students that they've ever taught were inside prison for many of the reasons that we just, you know, talked about. So, you know, that's something that I think is part to our mission that I mentioned, where the society just thinks that it's, you know, certain people are incapable, and that just couldn't be farther from the truth.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. So kind of capitalizing on something that Sean said. So what barriers still exist for incarcerated scholars, even with second chance Pell? We'll start with you this time.
So that is an interesting question. And so the organization that I founded, From Prison Cells to PhD, or Prison to Professionals, you know, we were one of the many organizations really advocating and working for, you know, many years to bring about Pell restoration. And, you know, we really were, there's this phrase Pell for all. And we, really had been advocating to really have access and opportunity for all incarcerated individuals. Although I shouldn't say although, I don't like starting with although, so we've reinstated Pell, but we would be remiss to really know that it's not quite Pell for all. So there are still, if you're at a correctional facility where there are no prison education programming, and there is correctional leadership that, is a little bit less willing to bring on prison education programming, then those people inside that facility don't get education. So, there's still this corrections being the gatekeeper of letting prison education programs in. And the fact that, people without any in-person prison education programming can't simply try to get online education or correspondence education using Pell. The way that the law has been changed and passed and reinstated, individuals can't do that. They can't, if it's not at their institution, they can't do a correspondence. They can't do some type of online course for their education. So it's not Pell for all. And so that's one of the things that I think is still a barrier. I sat on the NEGREG committee, the negotiated rulemaking for the Department of Education with my colleague and friend here. And one of the things that, we really pushed for was this to help mitigate that barrier is that we added this component where there needs to be an advisory committee helping advise the correctional institution who is serving as kind of the gatekeeper, who is serving as the gatekeeper to prison education. We put into the rulemaking that there should be directly impacted, formerly incarcerated, currently incarcerated, community stakeholders and other stakeholders involved in helping advise the correctional institution in their decision of what prison education gets brought in.
Yeah, so important. Wonderful.
Yes, that is the $10 million question here, and it really is a challenge, and it's a challenge that I'm very excited to be a part of with people up on the stage here with me and other stakeholders. Is one of the things that our work that we've been doing at the Reagan Institute of Justice with the technical assistance for the colleges, for corrections and accreditation agencies and things like that is basically we have 3 pillars, which are scale, equity, and quality. And that's really what we're focusing on as we look to scaffold up this programming so that, just as Dr. Andres had mentioned, there are a lot of educational deserts in this country, regardless of whether they're carceral spaces or not, but particularly in carceral spaces, there are some educational deserts out there. And we want to make sure that, we're working with the right stakeholders to try to eventually ensure that in some capacity, anyone who is incarcerated, just like anyone in the free world too, has that access to that educational opportunity. So that is definitely something that, we've been talking about, and, having the privilege of being on the negotiated rulemaking subcommittee was so important to work with. We had a very diverse group of stakeholders from community organizations, from people with carceral histories, corrections was at the table as well. Just an array of, incredibly talented people that were able to kind of share their experiences as we look to put in these guardrails, for that quality programming for students. So it will, come July 1st of 2023, when Pell restoration will, officially begin and kick off, it won't be magic. It won't be like, perfect overnight. But I think one of the great things about the Second Chance Pell experiment is, all of us working together in this space alongside the Department of Education have really been able to learn a lot of lessons learned. Vera has published a lot of publications, about the lessons learned so far in the Second Chance Pell experiment. And I think, we're doing as a community, as a country, trying to do as best as we can as possible to have a smoother rollout. But again, we're in May right now. We've got just over a year before this officially kicks off, and there are a lot of us doing, double time, triple time, quadruple time, really to try to put the infrastructure and support in as we kind of get closer to that July of 2023, but then also beyond July of 2023. And again, really trying to make sure that, we can close the gap on a lot of these inequities that we are seeing.
I would just add, from more of a structural lens, technology is a huge barrier. Just in terms of access, internet access, just digital literacy, technology access for people in prison. Good to see Terrell here. I just noticed he walked in. I would also add fiscal plant is also a huge issue. Prisons were not built to be classrooms, and there are multiple demands on correctional facilities spaces. And so finding kind of that appropriate space, appropriate time to deliver high quality post-secondary education. And that leads to my third point, quality. Quality is a barrier that we have. Education delivered in prison should be the same high quality as education delivered outside of prison. That's extremely important. And then finally, the fourth piece I would talk about when we talk about access is, Pell's great. We're so excited to have Pell back, but Pell is only one piece of the puzzle. State funding for post-secondary correctional education, I think, is so important. Pell inside of prison can only be used for certain expenses versus if you're outside of prison, suddenly you can be using Pell to help with transportation, to help with housing, to help with kind of the myriad other things that come up around post-secondary education. So I think also looking at what states are doing, I know more and more states are looking at funding. New York State just brought back the tuition assistance program inside of correctional facilities. I'm not quite sure what that implementation is going to look like, but also looking at state, Belinda was talking about buttressing and support, sort of state funding, buttressing federal funding. Pell, depending where you're going to school, might not pay for tuition. So if you can access both of those things, we can get higher quality, we can get more education in the door. So I think those are things I would highlight.
Yeah. So
If
much.
I could add, so I would love to just piggyback and add to something that you just mentioned about how correctional facilities aren't quite built for higher education. And, what is the plan to help that? Where are the funds? The one thing when we think about barriers, there's money coming in from Pell, but where are the funds to help, add capacity to the literal spaces where education would take place, both for computers, technology and things of that nature, but, Wi-Fi systems, I have an understanding that some places just aren't built for them to have that type of stuff. So, where's that type of funding going to come from is a challenge that I think we have yet to answer.
Yeah.
If I could, one of the things that I've been fortunate to see because of Vera's position in this space is kind of, as I mentioned earlier, working with corrections. And some of the states that we've seen thus far, I'll call out Michigan, for example. I think Ohio and I believe Illinois have been using some of the COVID relief funds that were distributed by the government for infrastructure such as that. I know in Michigan, I believe they, I'm sorry for Michigan if I get this wrong, but I believe it's 10,000 computer lap books that they purchase for educational opportunities for people who are incarcerated. I know that a number of other states right now, there's appropriations going through. I don't speak government, so I'm not sure if Sean can speak to this or anything, but I know that there's different appropriations going through government right now, and I know that corrections, at least with with the technical assistance that we've been providing, a lot of different corrections around the state have been, deploying more technology. COVID was awful in so many different ways, but one of the things we learned with COVID in the educational space was how important critical infrastructure like technology, Wi-Fi, and we have seen a significant uptick on that in a lot of different carceral spaces. So that has been a good thing when we're thinking about that scale and quality. But again, I'm not speaking for every different state here. Every different state is kind of moving towards this at different kind of in different stages. But there have been a number of different states that are truly leading the way in trying to get, that Wi-Fi technology, 5G, sorry, not 3G, 5G technology in Wisconsin. I was just in Wisconsin and talking with Wisconsin Corrections and meeting with students at different colleges just last week. This week, earlier this week. And, they were actually showing me that technology they have, the docking stations, and students were able to talk about what access to technology was like prior to COVID, and how, in the face of, such terrifying things as COVID was or is, now seeing some really beneficial infrastructure being put in that capacity. But again, it is something that we continue to work on for that July of 2023, but we know we're going to have to continue with that too.
Yeah, no, states are so important in this. The program that I was in was a state funded program. And so that is definitely a part of the picture. Are these barriers increased for some student groups?
I think equity is always really important in any kind of space. But I think, if you look at any of the reports, you'll see the overrepresentation of different communities within carceral spaces. And sometimes the classroom looks exactly like the population that happens to be in that location. Sometimes it looks completely different. You might have a majority institution of a carceral space where it may be, for example, 60% African-American, 20% Latinx, and 20% Caucasian and other. But the classroom might very much look majority Caucasian. And that is something that, we have been working on at the Vera Institute of Justice on our team as an organization, but also in our team in Unlocking Potential. We have a race, equity, and inclusion initiative. And a couple of my colleagues have been deploying different reports, but also surveys, and they're working hand in hand with a number of different states around the country to actually take a deep dive. And when I say the states, working with corrections to be like, look, this is what your carceral population looks like. Is it reflected in your classrooms? And if it isn't reflected in your classrooms, how can we work to make sure that it is more equitable? So that's something that we've been doing. But I'll stop there and see if my colleagues wanted to add anything.
Yeah, so to that point of what Belinda just mentioned, with the classrooms not always looking like the carceral demographic at that facility, that was a conversation that we had within the negotiated rulemaking. And the negotiated rulemaking was a process that had, I think, 12 different issues. And Pell, the prison education, was one of, I think, only 3 that reached consensus. So tough conversations, but we got to a place where, we got to a place of agreement. And that particular point was a very contentious, debated point of, what the classrooms look like. And, in that conversation, I mentioned that a lot of times the classrooms end up looking a lot wider than the institution because of several different various reasons. One of which being institutional policies are target certain groups, and then those certain groups get things such as violations. And then the educational team that's building the program puts together policies that say, oh, if you have this violation in the past couple of months or something like that, you can't be in the space. And inside prisons, a lot of times the groups that tend to get less violations are, tend to look a little whiter. So the folks that end up in the classroom tend to be a little whiter, the general population of the group. So, our organization, Prison to Professionals, we've, increased our capacity to really help corrections and educational institutions really think about that particular problem. We know very well, again, we have about 400 people that apply to our program per year across the country, and about 100 individuals, men and women, that go through the program where we help position them to be successful in higher education. What we found, and the reason, that what we do is even important, is because we know that the population of people that we're working with don't have the same support systems, whether you include incarceration or not, to be successful in college. So they're already coming from communities. Most people in prison are coming from communities where college is not a thing that is even thought about. So how do you, now we're throwing college in prison, we're doing all this effort, we're having all these meetings, and we're doing all these great things to increase college in prison, but then the folks that we want to help have not been given or don't come from communities that provide the support for them to be successful. Like maybe many of us here have had that type of support. Many people who've gone through higher education usually have that type of support. So that is also why the classrooms tend to be wider, because it's like, well, think about how you were in high school. Like, you never did good in high school. Like, why would you? So there's a bunch of different forces that are telling Black individuals inside prison spaces, like, that can't be for you anyway. Yeah, it's here, but it's not for you though. So we need to change that environment as well. And that's something that our organization is working with correctional institutions and educational institutions to do.
All right, we'll sum things up. What role can businesses and other organizations play in developing solutions? And we'll start with Sean.
So I think an important role for business is to serve as employers, and fair second chance, focusing on folks, kind of second chance hirings. There's a second chance business coalition that's formed of a lot of organizations. I think business can play a very important role in terms of hiring people who are formerly incarcerated, giving them a true fair chance at hiring, setting up internship programs, pre-apprenticeship programs, thinking about what kind of career supports people will need. I don't know if we talked about it yet, but it's extremely important to have credible messengers who are people who have gone through the process, people who have experienced the same types of things, and having those people not just at a seat at the table, but at a meaningful seat at the table, so that so someone maybe who's been formerly incarcerated is now working in GM to onboard people, and that person has agency and power when it comes to actually executing important things. So I think that's another important thing that business can do, is kind of advance credible messengers, and they are the employers. They are the kind of the end result for most of us non-academics in terms of employment. So, having them at the table, I think is so incredibly important.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I totally agree with what you've mentioned. I think that what we have been seeing in a lot of states right now is a lot of businesses really are stepping up in some ways, in the form of literally picking up the phone and reaching out to corrections and saying, look, do you have a technical program that can, provide individuals who are incarcerated with the credentials that we need? Because we definitely, have positions available and we're ready to hire these people, which is amazing. We're seeing a significant uptick in that. And I think that's really good. Asking the question if something already exists. In addition to that, if something doesn't exist, businesses working with corrections to get those programs into those facilities, so those individuals who want to pursue that educational opportunity to get that internship is really important as well. And then also back to Sean's earlier point about, what more can be done on the state level. If you're an employer or business, in a particular state, and you're seeing that you want to employ even more people who are, with carceral histories, what else can you do, such as talking with your state representatives? What else can your state do to help? Your states listen to a lot of different people, but particularly businesses. They really want to make sure that the states are really running along very smoothly in partnership with businesses, in that state. So in addition to, employing these individuals as well, what else can be done? Perhaps some of those, a lot of student support services and grants for people with carceral histories went away in 1994, just like the Pell Grants did. Pell is coming back, but a lot of those state grants for educational opportunities are not. So, businesses can, continue to speak with state legislature and that as well to kind of be like, look, can we experiment to see about, bringing back some of those state dollars and getting the data to show, just as Second Chance Pell has shown that this is a highly successful program. I'm sure that a lot of those state educational grants will equally show that it's highly successful and getting that much needed support.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let me be the first and last to thank the entire panel, thank the Ronald Reagan Institute. This has been just such an incredible experience. I'm so glad that we have good people working in this area, and I'm really just excited for the future. So thank you again for being here today.
Thank you so much to our first panel for providing that very clear reasoning for expanding access to post-secondary for all Americans. Our second panel will dive into the work of the state's level in actually implementing these programs. And our panelists come from very different seats. Abigail Jasinski comes to us from Governor Bill Lee's office, where she helps orchestrate access to post-secondary education for all incarcerated Tennesseans. In every conversation we have had so far, experts recognize the importance of correction agencies and officers in the implementation of this program. So we are very fortunate today to welcome Robert Green from the Department of Corrections in the state of Maryland. Finally, our expert moderator, Patrice Sultan, has done amazing work here in the district and elsewhere, and is the executive director of the DC Justice Lab. I'll let her share a little bit more about her background, but without further ado, please welcome our second panel to the stage.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Tyler. I'm so glad to be here with all of you today. We at DC Justice Lab work on a broad variety of criminal justice issues, but we have a small geographic focus. We really are focused on the District of Columbia. And I'm joined, as you just heard, by two experts and state leaders in both Tennessee and our neighbors in Maryland. And I'm looking forward to focusing our time today on talking about what does education look like at the state level, right? And thinking beyond even Second Chance Pell, and not thinking of that as an unimportant milestone, but recognizing that it's not a finish line. And I'd like to start by asking each of you to share with this audience, what is it that you're currently working on? What brings you to this work? And what are you seeing work really well in your state?
I'll jump in. You'll probably have to cut me off. I'm really fortunate to work for a governor that campaigned and was elected on two primary issue areas of access to high quality education and criminal justice reform. So this work is deeply embedded in our DNA as an administration, and has allowed us to really kind of break open the box of what we thought was possible to see what we can do better. So we really approach the question of access to education in our facilities, not just from post-secondary opportunity, which I kind of refer to as the icing on the cake of educational opportunity, but really understanding the fact that we're dealing with a population that over 50% of our incarcerated learners are still at an elementary reading level. So we're not dealing with people who are anywhere near access to post-secondary opportunity. We're working on getting them access to a high school equivalency so that they have choices, literacy, and the ability to engage in an opportunity that's most appropriate for them and where they want to go with their lives. And so we've really partnered holistically with our Department of Labor on that, our Department of Education, to make sure that we're providing high quality education that starts with the learner where they are and charts this kind of opportunity for them wherever they want to go. So we're looking at, traditional post-secondary opportunities in associate's degrees, bachelor's degrees. You can get a master's degree in a Tennessee prison with some of our partners in the liberal arts, in business entrepreneurship, but also vocational education and technical education. Tennessee has a really, really strong rural workforce, and we have recruited a lot of awesome kind of manufacturing oriented companies to the state. Volkswagen and Ford are really great examples of employers who are very, very interested in hiring in this space and need high quality, high skilled workers. So we've really leaned into bringing vocational training and kind of the colleges of applied technology into our facilities. So it's really just kind of making sure that we've got a little bit of something for everyone and all the appropriate resources in place to get them from A to Z, from doing assessments on day one of intake, understanding where that learner is in their continuum, what sort of supports they need as an individual to get where they want to go, and then making sure that we also have that kind of pipeline in place for warm handoff once they're released via the Department of Labor, to make sure that we're actually getting them into the job, and then providing wraparound supports to the employers so that they've got the competencies they need to be kind of an appropriate workplace for an individual who might have a little bit of a different need, some complex traumas in some cases, so that there's actually tenure and kind of stickiness in that employment, because showing up for work on one day and leaving on the second is not success in our opinion. So we want to make sure that people are really actually having access to those jobs and mobility within them.
Hello, I'm Robert Green. I'm Secretary of Public Safety. Been here in the state of Maryland. My lived experience, I started out in corrections as a correctional officer 38 years ago. I worked in local corrections. For me, this is not a matter of just making a living. It's about making change through the organizations that I've worked with. So I was in local government. I ran, previously was the director of the Montgomery County Department of Corrections, and then came to the state of Maryland. I'll tell you what we're doing, where we're at. We're doing some extraordinary things in our state. And I invite anyone in this room to come see what we're doing and how we are approaching it every day. We have 4 post-secondary education programs that are operating right now. One has been with us since 2012. We have a Georgetown program that is starting up with, our ambition was to begin in January in 2022 through the hard work of many individuals. That cohort is starting now. 300 individuals applied for acceptance into that program from within our system. So a lot of really important things happening. Like my colleague, one of the things that we did in Maryland in 2010 was we aligned correctional education under the Department of Labor and Adult Learning. So that move took place in 2010. It was pivotal. It was important for us to align learning with workforce development, with real jobs, and also make sure that what we're doing is the foundation of reentry for 92% of the people that are returning back to the streets of our community. I think we do an exceptional job. We all, people that sat in my chair, Correctional Leaders Association, we have 28 states that are involved in some manner, shape, or form. We know what we just went through, the 2 years that we went through. The data of where we were and where we're at, we saw the dips. We experienced the same things that we saw in many of our education systems. So we're recovering, and how we're coming out stronger than where we were. You've got to have a strong pipeline to the post-secondary education program. The 5th to 8th grade testing levels in math, they're real. So these pipelines have to do what we need them to do to create opportunity. But we can't also lose focus on what the environment in the community is that we manage in 18 prisons across the state of Maryland, 18 correctional facilities to include Baltimore City. Since 1992, the state of Maryland also runs the Baltimore City Correctional Complex. And I look forward to speaking to my colleague more about that connection there. And thank you for noting that. But we also have to recognize that these are programs of enlightenment, hope, focus, equity. I spoke to a gentleman, I was in the far west of our state, where our Max and our Max 2 facility is. I spoke to the principal in those facilities. That is unique that you have principals in facilities with those classifications. When we talk about groups, my mind goes to also to classification of who and where based on classification and behavior and how we engage them in programming. We're doing that across the state, vocational programming and a maximum security facility, because people are still going home. Such things, mandatory release, connectivity, connection. We're using navigators, reentry navigators, employment navigators. But here's a real important point I want to make. The conversations around accountability and individuals coming into our system and reentry and education are not mutually exclusive conversations. They are well-aligned conversations that need to happen in the exact same sentence of what we're doing in our systems to manage them, to create hope, opportunity, all the things I talked about. And I'll leave you with one thing that yesterday a gentleman told me as I walked the facility. They call me Green. Hey, Green, thanks for doing this. And I knew I was coming here. I said, what are you getting? What does this do for you? He said, me, hope. I love going to school. And he goes, I have a better conversation with my children. So now you want to talk about intergenerational and generational change that's taking place in the environment in which we find it. Those are real important conversations. And again, data, which I hope we have an opportunity to talk about.
Thank you. You guys both talked about alignment, and each of you touched on your local Department of Labor. It sounds like it takes a ton of coordination of a lot of moving parts to make sure that these programs are successful on the inside and that we have successful outcomes thereafter. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like to coordinate with different agencies, with business partners, with the federal government perhaps? And how do you make sure that you do that well? What should people be thinking about? And I'll start with Mr. Green first.
Great partners, great colleagues, real conversations about the complexities of operating programs inside these environments, and individuals that understand finding a path forward. No is not the first answer. And how do you do that? Data, producing data that aligns the mission. Is there a reduction in violence in individuals that are involved in education programs? Absolutely. All right, so how do you align the focus and the mission, making sure you've got good data, transparent data, readily available, so you can find your points of not just agreement, but where your missions align and have those people that get to yes, connections to our greater community, really strong connections to communities. We're focusing away from the idea of pre-release. We've all heard that term pre-release. In my state, we're moving towards pre-release is not another facility. People are going home to the counties, communities that they choose. We know if we don't connect them to their family, their children, and that which they are comfortable, recidivism goes up. So having this strong connection and conversation with the very community that people are returning to, not just the community has the most services, getting everyone involved. Our Department of Labor and those in correctional education, when we made that decision in 2010 on this alignment, I mean, we're following data, good conversations, but we're also seeing what's happening right in front of our face. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think I'll answer that kind of in two parts, because I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge that we as an administration inherited a system that already had some post-secondary opportunities operating. So we certainly were not the ones to kind of bring this in and be the hero there. What we did do, I think that's been really transformational in this space, is bring all of the stakeholders to the table to understand what the barriers to, growth and scale and access and equity had been in the environment that they'd been operating in. And so really listening to those partners and understanding what their limitations and restrictions had been, and making sure that we from the governor's office were using kind of our convening power to bring all of the right operational partners to the table to get to yes, to your point. If we're having an issue with access to internet and that's why we can't serve more students, or that's why we can't get in that facility, we as the governor's office in partnership with our Department of Correction have the ability to solve that problem. We just need to make sure the right people are at the table. So I think there really is something to be said for making sure that you've got kind of the people who can get you to yes, and then really to do the thing at the table, and to have really strong leadership. It helps that anyone who's ever had a conversation with Governor Lee immediately knows his heart for the space. And he's not a person that's going to take no for an answer if that no can be a yes. So it's more, how do we get there? And so that leadership has been tremendously powerful. But I think beyond the kind of executive leadership function, it's also important to make sure that there's space at the table for all of the community partners and all of the other folks who have a role to play in the system. You mentioned reentry navigators. What happens after a person is released is kind of, in my opinion, the measure of success of the work that we've done while they're incarcerated. And so if we're releasing them into a community that's not prepared to receive them and has all of these same kind of broken systems and processes in place, so that student's not able to make it to a classroom to complete their education if they've not completed, or they're not able to kind of achieve that next step, we failed as a system. So if we're saying our plan is to have this system of access to opportunity, and my job in the governor's office is to operationalize that opportunity, it really takes both parts. It's how do we make the system on the inside work? And that takes bringing all of the right partners to the table, holding space for all sorts of different programs. So we have a statewide, state-funded college program that leverages state institutions. We actually don't use Pell. We don't actually charge tuition for those. We just hire faculty members, and their full-time job is to teach. And that leaves all of the Pell and tuition assistance opportunities on the table for once that individual completes and has kind of agency to go on and do their own thing thereafter. We just view that as part of how we do rehabilitation in Tennessee. I think the data supports it pretty well. But we also have partners where we don't want to preclude an opportunity to an individual who might want to do something different than that. So we've got private colleges that come in as partners and do have tuition models. And we use Second Chance Pell in Tennessee for those. So making sure that there's space at the table for those partners as well. So just because they're not part of kind of the primary state system doesn't mean that they don't have a very valid role to play for the learners that they serve. And so making sure that both work, and then really kind of using economies of scale to make sure that both can work better. You know, when we're putting internet in a system or we're working through some security concerns in a facility, how do we do that in a way that creates more opportunity for everyone and even other accessory players that could then come in for mentorship or counseling or behavioral health care? You know, this internet question and, you know, how do we kind of open the box that is the walls of the prison allows us to serve so much more than just a classroom when we're thinking about it, I think in kind of the most holistic way possible. So really not neglecting those conversations.
And if you look at post-COVID, our glass is 3/4 full post what we've experienced because we were forced to open the box and really engage telepsychiatry and really engage how did we connect a person to a service when we couldn't connect two people together. And that has been significant growth for us. So, you know, another 1,000 tablets being deployed in our educational system, but in Maryland, we're in the deployment right now of a 1-to-1 tablet technology program. 1-to-1, you don't have to buy it. You don't have to pay a fee for it. That if you, there's aspects of it that you may want to enjoy, but the basic portal of information, right? How can you take free content and information and stream it? Information that just challenges a person or knows what education and programming is available in the system. All of those things. Oh, wait a second. Now I know what's here for me and I understand the pathway. I understand how to engage it. That technology piece and how to do that safely and how to do it and have that real conversation. This is how we're going to do it. This is what's going to happen and what's available to people. So again, our 1-to-1 tablet rollout that's occurring right now, I'm really pleased with that. And as an information exchange opportunity for individuals. Thank you for noting that.
I really appreciate those explanations of coordination and partnership. I would say that those are some of our biggest challenges here in the District of Columbia. We don't have statehood status. We don't have a prison here. We don't have a men's halfway house here. And so people are sent very, very, very far away. And one hand doesn't talk to another when we are thinking about what we're going to do for people as they come home. So I see that as one of our biggest challenges. I'm interested to learn which challenges you've found most difficult to surmount, either that you're still working on or that you found a really good lesson learned from that you'd like to share with our audience today. And I'll start with Abigail.
I'll answer this question honestly. The politics of this problem are almost impossible at times. We as academics can bring so much knowledge and evidence and data to bear about what works to improve public safety, to reduce recidivism, to reduce disciplinary infractions inside of facilities, to increase correctional officer well-being. We know what works. Braiding that with notions of justice for folks who believe that the punitive component of incarceration is the most important component of incarceration will always be our biggest obstacle. You kind of take 2 steps forward and 1 step back sometimes, where you can increase access to opportunity and increase access to programming or fund initiatives statewide, you know, to your good point. And they are very, very vulnerable targets. And you're constantly kind of working to navigate the political realities of the fact that if things exist solely in code and statute, they are very fragile. And that's just the reality of the criminal justice system and state policy in general. I mean, that's That's just the reality of things. And so it's figuring out, how do we really advance a culture that appreciates the importance of education and rehabilitation for public safety purposes, and that this isn't a nice to have, it's a need to have, and it's a must to have for public safety. Understanding what drives people to criminal behavior and what those criminogenic factors are is not really up for debate. There may be some people who just make mean choices, but those are some people. It's not most people, and it's certainly not all people. And so understanding how you can really intentionally change the trajectory of an individual's life with treatment and bring kind of some clinical competencies to the way that we do correction and rehabilitation is something that's going to take a long time, I think, to get enough buy-in in. And I think Tennessee is a great example of that in action right now, if you're kind of keeping up with what's going on. But it's an opportunity for tremendous leadership. And I hope that even in the face of adversity, we can continue to kind of show what works, and we'll have, you know, the evidence on our side that these programs are effective and very, very much worthwhile. But I think that's the biggest challenge I have to deal with. You know, we've got great partners that'll come to the table, and, you know, I've got a governor that is willing to kind of, you know, put funding behind what works and to be, you know, evidence-based in his decision-making. And so those things for us are the easy things. It's getting the buy-in more generally that's been the most difficult, but it's a challenge we look forward to.
Thank you.
I think all of them are problems, and we don't solve one and then walk away from it. It has to be continually fed. We got to look at the evolution of what we're dealing with. But for me, it's about the narrative of who we are and what we do. We're not a soundbite in entertainment media. We are real public safety practitioners doing incredibly good work. For me, it's about opening my doors and allowing people to see it and experience the good, the bad, and the indifferent, and be very honest about what we're all experiencing. It's constant problem solving. And it's about transparent data. And it's about, how do you get a data point that perhaps is one that you want to look at that is academic and criminogenic, as well as a data point that just meets the headline test of what we're attempting to do inside our system, and have a real conversation that's not, you know, here and here. And again, that common ground down the middle. Like, really, for everyone sits in my chair and every staff member that walks inside our institutions, they'll tell you, everyone that is involved in a program, that is involved in education. My principal said, I rarely lose a student to violence. That's a really important metric than what we're reading about every day. It's about the increase in violence in systems on our streets. How do we deal with that? That meets the test for all. And how do we find those middle conversations and metrics that matter, that create, and how we show hope, how we show these pathways result in, again, all of the outcomes we want, maybe just saying it a bit differently. And then, you know, having the ability, the will and the courage to change that which feels good, but doesn't produce what we want it to produce, and aligning, and really having the ability to be able to say, this is not having the outcomes that we want it to have. This is where we need to move. That has been my message for 3 years under Governor Hogan, and just and our system. We do far more great things every day than some of the sound bites that happen. And that's with everyone in this room's help. How do we continue that messaging? Because you never solve one problem. You just put it in the checked category. You got to revisit it, and you got to make sure that you're evolving with it. But these are programs that are the foundation of reentry and going home for 92% of the individuals that will be leaving us and returning to the streets of our community. And that's factual, it's non-disputable, and what those outcomes will be.
I really appreciate the point about data and empirical evidence and the narrative shift that's required, and how those things really help shape that narrative shift. When I listen to the last panel of speakers, when I look at Tyler, I also appreciate that there's something that's hard to measure when we think about success. right? When we think about how we measure the success of a program, besides recidivism, besides the things that we oftentimes see in the headlines. And so as our final question, I'd like to ask each of you to speak to, what does success look like? What does a successful transition home look like? What should that mean? And are we characterizing it the right way, thinking about it the right way? And I'll start with Mr. Green.
Yeah, thank you. A successful transition for us is doing everything within our power to recognize that individuals leaving us connected to all of those services. You know, we've created this environment inside our system where education is available and behavioral health counseling is available, substance use treatment is available. And how do we make sure every element of that is connected back to the community where people are going? Do we want programs inside our system that you can only find inside our system? We want to connect with the very community providers that are doing it, the connection with the colleagues and all of my fellow secretaries in their departments that provide these services. I don't want something that you can only find inside my institution. I want this continuity that's not about just a record. It's about real people. A successful connection is that an individual has all of those pieces in place to succeed. They have a roadmap to succeed. When they stumble, they have a roadmap of where they can go before that perhaps becomes criminogenic and becomes reincarceration, that we have in place systems that talk about like what we're getting ready to do in Baltimore City, the Therapeutic Treatment Center that Governor Hogan is funding. The footprint of a facility that talks about deflection, got a place for deflection to happen, diversion, and upon entry treatment, where you find them in an immediate connection to whatever the services are that a person needs, and facilities that will do that. All of those things I think are just imperative to success, and because people stumble, we all do. Understanding the pathway, the connection, and the connection not to an address, the connection to a person, a real place. That's important. Thank you.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, the ultimate measure of success is liberty, an individual maintaining liberty after release, not being reincarcerated and having agency in that liberty, not just getting by, but being well, having a home, having stable housing, having stable employment, having healthy relationships with their family and their community. That's what we're here to do, is to understand, what went wrong? How did you get to us? And what do you need to go where you were trying to go? Because I certainly think anyone in this room would agree that most people wouldn't pick prison. There's certainly some people that think that doing what they did to get to prison is good, because in some communities, those are the only words of affirmation as individuals get. It's good job on that. And the law says that was bad, but your community says that was good. And giving people access to something more powerful for themselves and giving them agency to choose a life that aligns with their values and what they want is certainly, from a state perspective, I think what we would consider to be success. That might be a bit Pollyanna-ish, but oh well, I'm okay with that. But it's, we had a conversation in the prep call about recidivism, and everybody uses recidivism as the measure of success, which is absolutely ridiculous because it's inherently a measure of failure. So why do we use how much we failed as our measure of success? Like, why aren't we at least using the other number of how many people were successful? But I think something from that data perspective that we're really working intentionally on as a state is to understand more about where people go when they don't come back to us. Because we've got that recidivism reentry statistic, but we don't know enough about how well people who don't recidivate are doing. Are they homeless? Are they stably homed? Are they employed? Are they making a living wage? Are they healthy? Do they die early? Are they a victim of violence? What happens to them later, I think, are things that we need to understand so much more in order to continue doing this work successfully, as far as kind of building that healthy ecosystem that leads fewer people to the front door of a prison to begin with.
Thank you so much for that. I want to thank both of you for your perspective. I think this was very helpful. We know that we're talking about 1 in 2 people in the United States having a family member who is incarcerated or who has been incarcerated. So we're not talking about the success of a small group of people, right? We're talking about the success of all of us. And I appreciate your approach to this as not just, a do-gooder kind of initiative, but this is about prevention. This is about making sure that we all have safe communities that are thriving and healthy. So thank you for all you're doing. Thank you for sharing your time with us. And thank you again for having us here.
Moved and filled with gratitude. And as I expressed to our speakers, the expertise and knowledge, leadership, and courage of the people in this room here, you have more of this knowledge than I could have in my fingertips. So I want to express how profoundly grateful you are, not just for lending your voice here today, but for the work that you've done. And as you've heard from our panel today, this work is extremely complex, can be extremely rewarding, but also extremely demoralizing when you take that one step back or those 10 steps back. And so often it is about a narrative and the stories that we tell. And I'm so thankful that you have shared these stories for those who are unable to share their voice. And the work that you're doing is so critical because those challenges remain in spite of all the great work that you've done here today. So thank you to those of us who joined online. We welcome you to share this conversation widely. And for those of you who have joined us here today, experts and esteemed individuals who could have continued this conversation, we're so privileged that you've agreed to join us at our roundtable to be part of the solution making. So please, after this conversation is done, join us for lunch, and we welcome you to contribute to the conversation as well. On behalf of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute, thank you again.